You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. It's time to talk to Chris. Chris, as always, it's great to see you here in the studio.
Good to be here, Daniel. How are you doing?
Really well, really well.
Good. So looking forward to talking about tonight's subject.
I was hoping you could let our listeners know all about the subject.
Well, quite often what we do is talk about planning and all this kind of things. All that's really, really important. But of course, people are the things that make places. So tonight we're going to focus on more what people are doing to change places, whether that's starting a business, converting an old building, or anything like that, or anything that affects place at all.
So, Chris, what sort of prompted us to cover this subject?
Well, last time, Daniel, if you remember, we had it was really interesting because at the end of the show, we've realised that someone had, I think, texted in or maybe tweeted about what they were doing, and they were actually they set up a taxi service. And what was interesting about that is it made us think, I think, that it's about how you bring a place to life, and people getting around a place is obviously pretty crucial to that. And then, of course, suddenly, as soon as you do that, you start to think, well, how do you build people? What about people that bring buildings to life? What about people setting up new businesses and breathing life back into a street or whatever? Or maybe people changing public space. So that's what tonight's all about, really. But it came from an interesting angle in a way. But if you can't get around, you don't have much of a place at all.
Yeah, it was very, very sort of interesting. We had some people suggest some sort of buildings or pieces of architecture that are, you know, you could say are changing a place or having an impact on a place, and that's been quite interesting as well, and got us thinking also about that kind of thing.
Well, I guess looking at what people have contributed, some of them are about heritage, which you'd expect, because I mean the reality is the island's full of great heritage. I've just been to see some tonight on the way, which is amazing, like Sherland Hall. So heritage, in a way you'd expect. It's great to hear those stories, and we are going to talk about them too. Festivals, of course, really interesting too, and also things like this bar is always intriguing. I mean, I would say that, I suppose, wouldn't I?
Yeah, I suppose that's the pub in Halfway, which people have probably known. We sort of thought that was relevant because it was once a post office, and of course many post offices are now moving into little shops, which has left these sort of buildings empty, and that's now become a really sort of local micro pub, which is kind of a new thing that's happening in areas. So we thought that was perhaps a good example. Well,
especially at a time when so many pubs are closing down. That one's starting up, one that's local, one's a microbrewery. That's all good, isn't it? And I think if more of that could happen, that'd be great. The other interesting thing I noticed was that they've launched a new beer, and they're going to donate some of the money towards the church in Sheerness.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
So it's a kind of loop going, a nice feedback loop going on there.
Right, which of course the Dockyard Church was another suggestion we had in as a building that's laid derelict, and now things are happening. So I suppose it's about getting people thinking about buildings and architecture and what could be possible, like the old post office. How
Absolutely.
I mean, I must admit myself, I never would have imagined you could transform that little post office into what it's become. So it just shows the potentials there if you've got the vision or the backing or the support or the people to do it.
Well, I think the vision, you're absolutely right, because that it's fantastic that the church is going to be brought back to life. But that is a great piece of heritage. It's a very beautiful building, and it will, I'm sure, really work. But in a sense, it's less glamorous. Sometimes it's less glamorous buildings or bits of high street or park or whatever, and turning them around is equally exciting in many other ways.
So could you just refresh our listeners what that subject is?
Yeah, because we often talk about planning and buildings, which is great, of course, and that's partly what we're here to do. We sometimes just forget about the people involved, and what happened at the last show is that we just started to think, well, how do we celebrate the projects that people develop that bring buildings back into life, or just start a business that changes a place, or anything like that at all. And of course we thought, we've just been talking about this marvellous new microbrewery that's transformed something that wasn't working and something that is working, bringing something back into life and re-energizing the community. So that's what it's all about. It's about people making changes, I guess, and that needn't necessarily be a huge project, although we just talked about the church in Sheerness Dockyard, which is very beautiful. It could be smaller things too.
Yeah, so one of the other suggestions, of course, is the what's been known now as the Rose Street Cottage of Curiosity, which is being run by the Promenade, and that was a museum basically, and it had sort of slowly been opened less and less, and had become not being used as much. And now the organisers of the Promenade Festival that takes place each year have took that on. It's sort of becoming a sort of museum creative space.
Yeah, so what it means is it's got a new lease of life, hopefully, but it's also rooted in community, isn't it? Because Promenade is all about celebrating heritage.
Yeah, and it's a group of people from the community who run it. So I think that probably is a good example, perhaps.
Perfect example, perfect. And you also know. I mean, you know more about the windmill than I do, but that sounds really intriguing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that sort of transformed Sheerness when it first got built, because suddenly for years it was just this little alley you walked down, and there was this little clearing and a very small sort of brick circular piece, which you wouldn't probably even know was a windmill necessarily straight away, and that was all it was really. And then suddenly it's been built back to, I assume, roughly how it would have looked, but obviously it can't be a windmill anymore, so it's become an office space where a business rents out. So again, that's an example of a piece of architecture that had become irrelevant, gone derelict, but now it's found a new use in modern times. Yeah, and
a new use, but also I guess these kind of buildings, and they're almost like totems, aren't they, in the landscape? They kind of let you know where you are, and you get used to seeing them, and of course when they go, you really miss them. And that's the truth of it. So they help you navigate, they help you move around, and they're just part of the local character. So it's great to see things like that coming back.
So, do you have any sort of ideas or advice on how that sort of might come about, or how people could get involved if they see buildings like that there's an idea, or how they could sort of back somebody else who's trying to do it but struggling?
Yeah, well, I think it is about the buildings themselves, but quite often it's about the I guess these days especially the business idea that you might have, no matter how small that might be. So it's almost, there's two things here. One is about, you might have to convert a building or do something to it, but actually what you do need is an idea for a business, and obviously brewing is a business, and that breathes life into that building that then serves the community. The other option is to look for funding to do something and then run a business from it. But the thing is that the funding always takes longer. That's the reality of it. Whereas a smaller bottom-up approach to starting a business just means you can just literally get going almost. The less, well, as we all know, the less startup capital you need, the quicker you can make things happen.
So I suppose it's one of those things, it's no good having an idea for a building and even managing to get funding or having the money to do it if there's no real use for it in the future, and the thing that's going to sustain that building is having a use for it.
I think that's the most important thing, and how I think all the energy's got to go into describing what your vision for that is, and then trying to find a way of starting it as I guess almost a going concern, so that if you imagine the building isn't the end product, it's a great thing to do, but actually sustaining the life in it is actually the most important thing, because then it benefits the community in more than just looking like a great building. It actually serves the community and adds to it.
Which I suppose in that case is the case with the microbrewery was once a post office. I assume there's no history of a pub being there, and like the windmill,
exactly.
It's now an office space. So it's looking at it in that context.
I think it is looking at it in that context, but it also means that you just got to, in a sense, forget the rule book and just think, well, what might work and what works for me, as much as anything else. Because if your skills are in a certain way and you can identify a use for a building that allow you to use those skills, then brilliant.
So you shouldn't be bogged down about what the building was originally built for its use.
I think you shouldn't. You can't be. And I don't think if a building's listed or whatever, you've got to be very, very careful about how you then change it. Very, very careful. And of course, there's lots of advice on that kind of thing from Historic England and other services. But if the building, the priority is to get it back into use, isn't it? If it's less ancient or not listed or whatever. So what you've got to do is focus on repurposing it. And of course, I mean, I guess I would say this, but it's always good to have an architect help you do that. But I do stress the most important thing is, what's it going to be used for, this building?
We're talking to Chris, and Chris is from Design South East, and we're talking all about how sort of buildings are important to the people, and the people are important. We've been looking at some of the sort of buildings where a community have been involved, or a small local business has changed a building into something new and relevant. So we've been talking about the windmill in Sheerness, or the Dockyard Church, Sherland Hall, the little micro pub, and one of the other things that was suggested was the gateway in Sheerness, which of course was an old Woolworths. And I got thinking, there's been lots of Woolworths around. They've sort of all been turned into different things, and how that space has been turned into a gateway on the islands.
Yeah, I think when Woolworths closed, there was a real concern everywhere, really, that it would have a real impact on the high street, because suddenly, a building that attracted a lot of people might potentially be empty. And I think it did prove to be the case, that it was a problem and is a problem. And I guess it's a part of the ongoing change in the high street generally. We're very lucky anywhere to have a thriving high street. I know that Faversham does. I know that other places don't. It's to do with a lot of different factors, obviously. But the more, again, we can do to re-energise the high street in new and different ways, especially when community uses can be found for them, then the better. Because the future of the high street, as we know, is being completely changed by the whole way in which we shop, and how we shop not just for products, but how we shop for services.
Yeah, I think that's one of the nice things about Sheerness. Hopefully, is you've got things like the town team now. You've got the seal. You've got obviously the promenade now running the Rose Street Cottage of Curiosity. So those sort of community things are coming into a high street that was once purely all shops. But do you think people are sometimes put off? And there's obviously a lot of work, and I know the runners taking on the Rose Street Cottage. There was a lot of work on it. It was I think it went on for well over a year or so, and they're still working on getting it right. And that's sometimes the difficult thing, or the worrying thing, is how much it's going to take and what it could end up dominating to you if you start something like that, whether you're a small business or a community group.
Well, it's true, because anything to do with buildings takes a lot of time, and usually, if you're not careful, quite a lot of money too. But I guess you've got to balance it with the reward that you get back, both for yourself and then what you put back into the community. I mean, just coming back to the whole high street thing, the reality is that it isn't just a question of communities doing it. It's to do with policy. It's to do with entrepreneurs. It's to do with a whole range of things. Otherwise, our high streets will frankly disappear. It's also probably to do with people living in them again, which of course they always used to do, living above the shop and all that kind of thing. Maybe that needs to come back, and so we can at least get people back into the high street doing things. So maybe this is also about interesting thoughts about how we live in towns, as much as new ideas for businesses and new ideas for historic buildings.
I was going to say, talking about that, do you think that more people do have an understanding that something can have an impact like that? So I was thinking, although it's not near here, the Turner Contemporary on a bigger thing, people it appeared quite against it initially, and they wanted, money spent elsewhere, and yet we've actually found now it's been built, that whole Margate does seem to change. There's people coming in, there's these little shops, even the Dreamland has now been redone, so it has had what I call an indirect effect, and perhaps people are becoming more aware, these little buildings, being used, that although it might not seem it can have an indirect effect, which affects things in a way you never thought they would, but can do that. It just takes time.
It does. I mean, regeneration always takes a long, long time. There's no getting away from that. But I think what's interesting about Margate is that it has, for better or worse, a very distinct brand. A lot of people know Margate, and they don't always associate it with good things, but they should. And generally the people that aren't associating with good things are the people that haven't been there, especially been there recently. And when you go, you have got Turner Contemporary, which is absolutely fantastic, but you've got a load of other improvements to the town centre that, you walk around and you feel great because it's so good. The great new restaurants, bars, and all those kind of things that you need as well. I keep coming back to bars, I don't know why that is. But the thing is that it does work, but you can't make it up, this stuff. You can't just say, we're going to be you've got to actually do it. You've got to make it happen for real, which is the thing about regeneration. It has to be about physical change happening on the ground for people to change their minds or change their perceptions about you as well. I mean, it's interesting that East Kent, in a sense, a lot of it is to do with what people perceive, how people perceive it. And I guess it's the same with any area that hasn't quite got the cachet that other places have. It's how they're perceived is incredibly important. But what I think is you can't just, pay someone to do a branding exercise. We've seen that happen all over Britain. It doesn't work. It doesn't work because people don't. We're not stupid. We know that nothing's changed. It's just been rebranded a place. But as I say, I think what is great about what's happening here and what's happening in Thanet is that it is genuine physical and community change that's driving it.
And I think one of the things we're going to sort of briefly talk about, and it sort of follows on from the subject we've been talking about areas, how often lots of houses are built, and obviously there's lots of houses and then people feel the infrastructure doesn't happen. Again, how that infrastructure can change a space. And we were talking about how the big sort of what I call the Thistle Hill estate, now there's a school being built and they're talking about a supermarket getting put there, so it's again going to sort of change the infrastructure, even the people that want to live there, because a school being built means people will live there or move there that perhaps wouldn't have done because there's now a school coming there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, in a sense, what we've been talking about the whole show is about infrastructure, whether it's community focused or whatever, really, or historic environment. But it's all about infrastructure. But this is a more direct thing where you've got a not untypical lag in housing provision. And then where, I think communities quite often feel they're told that the infrastructure will get put in, whether it's a new railway station, whether it's a school, whether it's a supermarket. And that may or may not happen. And I think, obviously, and it's not... I'm sure many of the house builders out there at the moment, the developers, will tell us it's not always that simple to say that the infrastructure needs to go in first. But that is the way that it needs to be done, if at all possible. Because the infrastructure, as you said, is what attracts people to that place in many, many ways. It isn't just the fact they can have a home, it's about what they can do there, and that's again the theme of tonight's show, really.
I was going to say, in reality, why do you think it always seems to work the other way around now? Is it a fear or reluctance of spending the money till the houses have been built?
Yeah, I think that the reality is that building homes, although I'm sure people might be sceptical about this, is a pretty high risk business, and there's a lot of money involved and a lot of risk, and the money's one thing, but it's the coordination of all the planning approvals and the movements of money that have to take place. Quite often the infrastructure is put in, particularly, obviously transport and schools, by the county rather than the district, so there's something to coordinate there, which I'm sure works well, but it's always going to take time to coordinate. It's a simple fact. It'll be very interesting to see, of course, what happens with the Garden City in Ebbsfleet, where that essentially comes under one organisation, the Urban Development Corporation. Whether that, and I think the government's intention is very clear, they do want to speed it up. So it'd be really interesting to see if that works.
Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
Well, one thing I do want to say, Daniel, is that we run a programme called Kent Design. It's kentdesign.org. Really keen that listeners take part in an event, particularly if they're developing a neighbourhood plan or involved in one. We're going to do an event later in the year focused, I guess, at parish councils, but local communities who are looking at developing or are currently developing neighbourhood plans. We'd like to talk about character and place and the role of character and place in those neighbourhood plans. So if they log onto our website, kentdesign.org, you can get to it from designsoutheast.org, or of course anyone can contact me at any time. It's Chris at designsoutheast.org, and obviously through Twitter at Design Southeast.
Did you want to refresh our listeners into what Design Southeast is and what you do?
Well, at the moment we're just incredibly busy with a thing called Design Review, where we look at schemes usually early in the planning process, everything from one-off houses in the countryside to major new developments. The other area, we work a lot with communities whenever we can, very interested in that area too. We're also helping local authorities handle, I guess, some critical issues like how to accommodate growth, how to look at higher densities in housing. Not easy. The ripple effect from London is certainly happening and can be felt. We, at the moment, clearly as a nation, but particularly the South East, cannot accommodate all the people that want to live here, and it's a massive issue. So how do we do that? How do we do it in a way that preserves quality of life? Because obviously high density for many people might say, actually, that's not going to contribute to people's quality of life. So how do we do that in a way that maximises human interaction but doesn't diminish quality of life, and obviously preserves character too? So some thorny issues that Design Southeast are getting stuck into, and now we've just become formally a charity. We're now a registered charity. So I think that kind of projects and protects our independence, our impartiality a lot more. And certainly, yeah, we're very busy, and we're delighted to be working also in Swale quite a lot, and North Kent in general. So yeah, it's buoyant, but really always very keen to talk to your listeners, and to you, of course, Daniel, and just get the dialogue going, really, because that's what it's all about for me.
Well, Chris, as always, if you're happy, I'd like to thank you very much for coming along once again.
Well, thank you, Daniel.
We look forward to seeing you very soon.
Bye for now.
That is Chris from Design Southeast.